Hey everyone, I'm Eric, and this is Bartos Media. I might finally be making the switch from my beloved Fuji photography rig over to Sony for photography. And maybe videography. Let's talk about that. Alright, so this is going to be a hybrid review / comparison / off-the-cuff type of thing. I have a rough overview and script of what I want to touch on, but I'm going to try to do something a little more free-formed than my last two videos. But we'll see how that works out. Now, before we dive into this, everything on this table is gear that I bought with my own money over the last couple years. No manufacturers have contacted me to talk about any of this, and I just want to share my own honest opinions about my personal selection of camera gear. Let's start off by talking about what I've got going on here and why I have this stuff. So before I was into videography, I was very into photography. And I was, at the time, working on a somewhat limited budget. And I realistically still am, considering that I just bought all of this studio stuff. And my goal back then was always to find the most exciting gear that I could to produce the best possible images within my budget. Now recently my budget has increased, as you can see by the addition of the A7C and the pair of lenses for it. Now before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video and why I'm thinking about switching to Sony after being such a fan of Fuji for so long, let's talk a little bit about the A7C that I have in front of me, and then we'll walk a little bit through the Fuji, and just because I like to make things a little spicy, we'll throw in the Panasonic as well. The A7C has been around for quite a while now, and it's nothing particularly new or really that exciting. And if you watch any review on YouTube, you'll learn that it's basically an A7 III from 2018 in a smaller, slightly more compact body. You'll notice that the big hump on the top is gone, replaced with a smaller rangefinder style viewfinder over on the side. It has the same 24.2 megapixel sensor with a native ISO of 1000 to 51,200, with that extended ISO range from 50 to 248,800. The A7C has a 5-axis in-body stabilization system, just like its bigger brother, the A7 III. And it's impressive that a full-frame camera, honestly, can fit inside of a body that is just slightly bigger than my Fuji X-E1. I think we've really come a long way in tech, but let's see how that really stands up to Fuji when it comes to taking photos. The thing that really got my attention with this camera were the amazing photo and video features, especially considering I already have a camera that is great for photos, the Fuji, and I have two cameras that are great for video, the Panasonic and the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera that is recording this video. However, I don't really own anything that is great for photography and videography in one small, compact package. And in addition to that, I was looking for a rock-solid, compact camera that was capable of 4K video with unlimited recording time that I could use alongside of my Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 4K for a much larger project that I have in the works. And really, that's kind of what this camera is shaping up to be. Now, in my limited time with this camera, I've really been blown away by the image quality for both photos and videos. The added bonus of being able to shoot in S-Log3 or HLG really gives this camera an upper hand in this price point. And let's talk about that price point. This camera body alone, without any lenses, at the time of recording this video, can be picked up for $1,798. Giving it just the slightest edge over the A7 III that comes in at $1,998 at the time of recording this video. Now, sometimes the A7 III can be on sale and you can get pretty much the same kit for maybe even less. But it is worth mentioning that there are some differences between the A7 III and the A7C. And depending on your use case, this might make the A7 III or the A7C a better camera for your particular use. Let's start off with the A7C. It has fewer controls on the back. There's no joystick for moving the focus point around or customizing or whatever, and there are very few customizable buttons on the back of this camera, or anywhere on this camera really. Now, for me, this really wasn't that big of a deal because in Fuji world, there's one customizable button, and that's the function button. And you really don't want to customize it because you need it to pull up the function menu. Now that's very similar to the way the Sony A7C works. I was really already used to using the function menu for everything on the Fuji. Using the same function menu with a very similar layout on the A7C really wasn't that big of a deal for me to get used to. And it is also a similar thing on this Panasonic, honestly. It's just you have the added bonus on the Panasonic of a full touchscreen interface. Now, the one advantage the A7C does have over its bigger brother is this tilty flippy screen. Oh my gosh, Sony. I'm so glad I picked this camera, honestly, over some of your other offerings with only the tilty screen. Just like the A7 III that only has a tilty screen rather than a tilty and flippy screen. Now, the overall layout of this camera makes a lot of sense. The card slot is under here, this little flippy door, flippy flap, and it does have more inputs underneath two other flaps here. The benefit to this over pretty much every camera out there now is the fact that they're on hinges rather than the dangly doors that the A7 III or the Blackmagic camera has. On the side of the camera, along with the SD card slot, we have an external microphone input, a headphone output, an HDMI output, and a USB-C port. The few other things I've heard people complain about on the A7C is the lack of front twiddly wheels, so you can change your settings with your finger in the front and your thumb on the back, and the fact that it does have a smaller grip. Now, it is a compact camera, so the smaller grip is expected. However, they could have probably added that knob, but honestly, it doesn't bother me much because look at the Fuji. When we're talking about a photography camera, this Fuji has a non-existent grip. I added this grip from, I think, JB Designs. I don't think they're around anymore, just to give myself a nice, solid point to hold onto this camera, along with this little thumb bracket for the hot shoe. In addition to that, it doesn't even have a little twiddly bit on the front, so it doesn't bother me at all. So I've spent a lot of time talking about the camera itself and how it compares to the Fuji just a little bit. But before we move on to the lenses, let's touch on some of the benefits of the A7C over the A7 III, specifically for shooting video. As I mentioned before, we've got unlimited video record time. However, we also have some improvements in the autofocus department. Now, I've never used an A7 III before, so this is only based off of the videos I've watched and a little bit of research I've done. But it does appear that the A7 III does not have eye-tracking autofocus in video mode, where the A7C does in fact have eye-tracking autofocus when you're in video mode. I've tested this out just a little bit when I was making another video, and it's shockingly great. Now, this camera is amazing for autofocus. It's super fast and super accurate for both photos and videos. I'd say about 95% of the time when I was using autofocus, it was getting my focus point dead on. One last thing to note about the autofocus system and the camera itself is that the tilty flippy screen is actually a touchscreen. Now, you can't really use it for anything other than setting your focus point, but I do find it is more useful to use the touchscreen to set the focus point than it is to try to scroll around to where you want like you would have to do on the Fuji. However, the Fuji does a much better job of handling that focus point selection with the arrow buttons on the back than the Sony does. Now, I wasn't planning on doing a full review of the A7C, but here we are. So let's move on and talk a little bit about how this compares to my previous photo experience. And I'll try to keep this short because I have a bit to say about the lens choices that I made for this Sony before we wrap things up. So in short, I've never had a full frame camera, so I really didn't know what to expect when picking up the Sony A7C. I can now say that the switch to full frame is 100% worth it. Now, I know some people will argue otherwise, and I will even say that having a crop sensor has never really bothered me in the past. But having full frame really makes things easier to deal with in the world of picking out lenses. You don't need to think about the crop factors at all. You just get the focal length that you buy. Anyway, enough about that. I'm not going to pick a side in the full frame versus crop debate. I'll have to just plan for making that video, doing a deep dive on full frame versus crop and all that fun stuff in the near future. But that brings me to what I was originally going to make this video about, and that's the lenses. I picked up this camera in a large kit from B&H. It was the standard kit with the normal kit lens, the 28 to 60 f4 to 5.6, plus this compact 24mm f2.8 G series lens. In addition to the lenses, it came with the Peak Design Everyday Sling, a memory card, an extra battery, and a dual battery charger. Now, I swear this video isn't actually sponsored by B&H or anything, I just really liked this kit. It was a great deal for what you got. Now, it's all great if you're just getting started with photography. And these lenses honestly are nothing to sneeze at. They will get really nice looking images. Take a look at the few of these I shot on the 24mm lens over the weekend. Some of these are edited to match the style I've created over the years, and others are just right out of the camera raw with lens correction applied. And we'll talk more about that lens correction in just a moment. As you can see, these are really beautiful images. Nothing really stands out to me as being wrong with these pictures, other than maybe not being very creative, but I've been in video world for so long, so forgive my lack of creativity or interest that I create with my photos right now. Now, one thing I do want to mention is how crazy the distortion is on this 24mm lens. Check out this photo before applying the lens profile in Lightroom. Now, here's the same photo with the lens profile applied. To me, that's a little insane, but keep in mind, most cameras will do this correction in camera if you're shooting in JPEG, and Lightroom has all of the lens profiles that you'll probably need if you're shooting in RAW, so it's really not a big deal, but I just kind of thought it was interesting. It's also worth mentioning that almost all cameras, and all three of these cameras, will have lens distortion, and 99% of the time, if you're shooting in RAW, they're going to correct that digitally inside of the camera. But I just really thought that was something interesting and worth noting, and that you might not really get the best image across the entire frame on this 24mm compact prime. However, I will say the chromatic aberrations on this lens are fairly minimal when wide open, and like most lenses, they're pretty much completely gone when you stop it down just a bit. And one really great thing about this lens is the minimal focus breathing when you're using it for video. Sure, it's kind of noticeable, but if you don't actually know what focus breathing is, first of all, don't go looking it up. Second of all, you'd never know it was happening if you didn't know about it. And the last great feature on this lens for video particularly is the option to declick the aperture with the flick of this little switch on the side. Now, real talk for a second, this lens on its own is $598. At this price point, getting a compact prime with these features for both photo and video is kind of unheard of, especially for a 24mm, since most companies kind of have a hard time designing a solid 24mm lens. Sure, the Sony GM version of this lens performs a little bit better, but it's honestly almost twice the price of this. So you might as well just stick with this until you really need to make that upgrade. And honestly, after watching a lot of videos comparing all of the other lenses, I might go as far to saying this is a best-in-class compact prime for full frame. Now, let's move on and talk about the kit lens. Now, I've had a lot more experience with the 24mm, but I have taken enough shots and enough video with this lens to give it kind of my first impressions. It's not anything crazy, it's honestly a pretty standard kit lens. Not really great, not really terrible. The lens, like the one on my Panasonic here, is a collapsible lens. So if you've never seen a collapsible lens before, they're actually pretty cool in my opinion. You just have to kind of give them a little turn, and they expand into a pretty much normal lens size. And I think that's pretty cool to keep things compact, especially when we're looking at an A7C, where I'm pretty sure the C stands for compact. For video, this lens works fine in a well-lit situation, and for photo, it really does the job. It's just nothing to really write home about. And until I save up enough money after burning all of my money on this setup, when I don't want to use the 24 or I need something a little more versatile than the 24, this will do the job. There's only a couple real drawbacks to this lens, honestly, and it's really the fact that it's an all-plastic build except for this metal lens mount, and it has a very stiff zoom, and I would not recommend using that for video. However, for photos, it is honestly nice and sharp with minimal distortion and chromatic aberrations, and it does fit very well with the compactness of this camera. So if that's what you're looking for and you don't want to break the bank on some of the Sony's more expensive lens offerings, this will get the job done until you can afford some better glass. Going back to my point about getting either the most exciting gear for my money, or in this case it was the most gear for my money, or the most bang for my buck, this was a no-brainer. I did the math on this lens and the kit and all that, assuming none of the other items were discounted, but they probably were. If I were to return this entire kit through a very complex set of transactions, and I were to only buy the body, the 24mm lens, the bag, the memory card, the battery, and the dual charger, and get everything that I have here except for the kit lens, it would really only save me $100. So in the long run, it's fine. It gives me options to put on my camera right out of the box, rather than having to save up for all the other lenses. So now that we've got all the lenses covered, let's talk about why I'm switching over to Sony. First, I absolutely love the images on my Fuji X-E1. And I bought that thing back in 2014, and it still has great image quality. It's a roughly 16 megapixel sensor, if I'm remembering correctly. So I might really be over-exaggerating how much lenses play into the whole equation here. But part of me is thinking that's why this kit shines so well. This is the kit lens for this Fuji, and it's absolutely amazing. The kit lens that came with it is a pretty standard 18 to 55mm f2.8 to f4, but the quality of this lens is just so amazing. Low distortion, low chromatic aberration, and just overall solid build. I might be biased on this lens just a little bit since I've been using it literally exclusively since I got it with this camera. I never did really buy any other Fuji lenses. Did I want more lenses, and do I want more lenses? Yeah, I do. Did I need more, or do I need more? Honestly, I really didn't need any other lenses. This lens is perfect for all-around photography. Just check out some of these shots that I took on this camera. The Sony, to me, does have better image quality right out of the box. However, color, in my personal opinion, is light years better on the Fuji. And that's honestly why it's so hard for me to make the switch. I have fallen in love with this Fujifilm camera and its colors. And honestly, if they had a better video workflow, I probably would have gotten another Fujifilm. But I would never be able to make the jump to Fuji full frame, because a Fuji full frame body only is literally double what I paid for this entire rig and all of its accessories. Now, I'm not going to do a full-on review of this X-E1 because it's such an old camera, and I'm sure it's everywhere on YouTube. But Fuji will always be in my heart when it comes to photography, and I will never forget all the adventures that I've gone on with this camera. And honestly, just because I'm switching to Sony doesn't mean this camera will sit around gathering dust. It's still going to come with me anytime I go out for a full day of photo shooting, or when I'm doing something that I really want that Fuji color for. Now, I really don't know what that would be off the top of my head, but when the time comes, I'm sure I will know. And let's keep things spicy. Even though this is going on way too long, let's talk a little bit about the Panasonic and why I actually have it. When it comes to video on the Panasonic G7, I really have nothing to complain about, other than the fact that the limited gammas that it has built in. But honestly, for what it is, you can get great videos out of this camera. Just take a look at this sample. It was shot on this particular camera with this exact 12 to 32 f3.5 to 5.6 lens on my Ronin SC gimbal. And honestly, in my opinion, for a super small micro four thirds sensor shooting at 4K, this is amazing. I mean, it's not a GH5 or something like that, but really as a first camera that I bought specifically for video and as my intro to video camera, it did the job, and honestly, it still does the job. Right now, I'm using this camera pretty much as my permanent overhead rig behind me, unless I'm doing something very overhead shot focused, kind of like the next video that I have coming up, where I would swap it out for the Sony just to get a little bit more control over the image by shooting an S-Log3 or HLG. As far as photos go on this camera, it's really nothing to write home about. If I was in a pinch without my Fuji, I would use it to take pictures, but that would be really the only time I would ever use this over the Fuji. When I was trying to vlog, yes, I did try to vlog at one point, I would carry around the Panasonic to do my vlogging, and then I would carry around the Fuji to do my photography. And I would have it ready to go in my backpack at any moment. More recently, I was using this Panasonic as my primary gimbal camera, especially since the Blackmagic is just a tiny bit too heavy for use on the Ronin SC. While it is possible to use, it requires counterweights, and usually I have to take it out of the cage, so it's kind of a pain to use with the Pocket 4K. However, throwing this little guy on the gimbal is no problem. The video is totally passable, and it's gonna do the job just fine. Overall, I bought this Panasonic G7 as my kind of intro to video camera, and it did that job. And heck, if you're looking for a super cheap camera that shoots 4K and takes decent pictures, this is honestly a great deal. I picked up this whole camera, the Rode Videomicro, and a GorillaPod with this lens for just around $500 total. Now, I did buy the camera and lens used, but honestly, it was in great condition, and it's a great way to save a little bit of money. To wrap things up, I've had a great experience using the Sony camera over the last few weeks, and I think it might be time to make the switch to use Sony for most of my photography needs. Especially when I want to travel light or I need a camera that can switch from shooting photos to videos in a moment's notice without having to rig up the entire Blackmagic Pocket 4K just for a few seconds of video. Honestly though, I don't think Sony will ever replace my Blackmagic or any future Blackmagic cameras for my video setup, especially at the price point that you can get a Blackmagic camera at. But really, only time will tell for that one, and let's see what Sony has to offer in the future. This video has gone on far too long, so I think I'm gonna wrap it up right there. Hopefully you found this video helpful if you're deciding between maybe the Sony A7S III or the A7C, or if you're considering multiple different brands of cameras. Hopefully my information about why I'm switching helps you make a choice between a Sony, a Panasonic, a Fuji, or maybe even a Nikon. And like I said, I'm gonna have videos coming out about full frame versus crop sensors and a whole bunch of other cool topics in the very near future. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on those videos. And also, if you're down there, might as well give this video a like because it really does help. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.